Hey everyone, Mark DeYmaz here with my good friend William Vanderbloemen, and excited about a brand new book that he has out with another friend of mine, Warren Bird. The book is called Next, Pastoral Succession That Works. It's a fresh and very important topic in the church world for all of us as pastors. In fact, William and I were talking earlier, and the fact is this: if you wait till it's time to pass on the church, you waited too long. The conversation of succession needs to start way in advance of a pastor transitioning. And so I want to talk to William. William, welcome. I'm glad to have you with me today and talking about the book. Tell me this first. How did you get a heart for this issue in succession?
Well, thanks for having me, Mark. Really appreciate it. Our company, churches hire us to help them find their pastoral staff. And boy, over and over and over, we were going in cleaning up a mess after there'd been like a long-time successful pastor. A new guy had come in and only made it a couple years, and then, we were called to bring in the next guy. And, we're like, this is crazy. There's got to be a better way to do handoffs. So started looking around. There's just not many resources in the church world. Went to the corporate world, and the corporate world got pretty serious about succession planning 15, maybe 20 years ago. And there are quite a few good resources there, but they're for the corporate world. So, we kind of did some translation there, and then we studied about 500 pastoral transitions. And then if you know Warren at all, he's just a research nut, and he's really, really good at it. So we ran about 200 full case studies with interviews, and we talked to people who had great successions. We talked to people who didn't have great succession. We talked to everybody at the Crystal Cathedral except for Robert, and everything from a third-generation church in Baton Rouge that's handed from father to son to grandson successfully, to everyone who didn't make it at First Baptist Dallas, and tried to look for some baseline commonalities that would help be a little bit of a blueprint. The longer we studied it, the more we realized there is no cookie cutter. You really have to customize your succession plan. But there are a few key touch points that seem to come up over and over again, and wanted to get those down on paper and create a resource for pastors and churches, and frankly, just make it a legitimate conversation to have. I think a lot of guys who are in their pastorate and they know their time's coming to a close, whether it's retirement or they're ready to move to a different part of the country or a different kind of ministry, they really feel like they can't bring the conversation up. The minute you start talking about pastoral succession, the board says, "Are you leaving? Are you?
Yeah.
Why are we talking about this?" So hopefully it'll create a space for an honest conversation and give some tools for that conversation.
Yeah, that's great. As I've mentioned to you before, here in our own church, I started early talking about succession and made it a part of the conversation that, I'm not out to build my own kingdom. My whole thing is about, moving our church from stability to sustainability, and that sustainability doesn't involve me probably down the road. So here at Mosaic in Little Rock, it's a normal part of our conversation, and I know it's very helpful to have a book and a resource like this to help us and many other churches through it. Let me ask you, you mentioned kind of a couple core principles. What are a couple of the basic ones that transcend no matter the unique circumstances or situation? Sure. What are a couple of the key core principles?
Well, one is the big idea behind the book. And if this idea can get grasped and understood by pastors and boards, then we've done all the work that I wanted to get done. And here it is. Every pastor is an interim pastor. And I didn't know that when I was a pastor. I just never even think about it. But, we spend all our time talking about eternity and what's going to happen in the afterlife, and we rarely think, well, what's going to happen after I finish this part of my career? I get applications all week long for people that want to find their next spot in ministry, and they'll say, I want to be a student pastor, I want to be a senior pastor, I want to be a teaching pastor, I want to be this. Very rarely will I get a resume that says, I'd love to be an interim pastor.
Yeah.
but the truth is, the way I see it, one of three things is going to happen at the end of your ministry. You can run the church into the ground and go close it. That's one option, right? B, Jesus could return while you're pastor. That'd be kind of cool, but maybe shouldn't put all your eggs in that basket. or C, someone's going to follow you. And so, even if you just want to be plain selfish, the best chance you've got at leaving a legacy is securing the next person's success. And that's probably the core principle behind the whole book. If you can just get that in your soul and be okay with it, then boards need to get okay with that. Pastors do. I think too often churches, forget that the church is the bride, but it's the bride of Christ and not the pastor. So if the pastor talks about moving on, he's not like cheating on his wife or dating around or something. And then within the succession plan itself, I think having an outside voice that helps guide the conversation is something we saw that was really helpful in success stories. Mm-hmm. I think that the pastor had enough financial resource to retire, which you wouldn't think about, but a lot of guys just don't plan. Mm-hmm. And now that we're in an era where, Willow was planted in 1985 and Saddleback in 90, around that era, the number of non-denominational pastors exceeded those who are actually in denominations. Mm. Denominations have pension plans and, all kinds of retirement vehicles. Non-denoms, who knows? Some of them have nothing. Some of them have great plans, but we saw a lot of places where the succession plan failed just because the pastor literally couldn't afford to retire. Yeah. So we offer some financial planning tips for boards, some ways for the board to help the pastor, a way for the pastor to, be able to have an honest conversation about these things.
Yeah, real quick, that's an important point because so often what gets lost in ministry is the fact that this is, at the end of the day, it is also a job.
That's right.
A real job where there's real money and money that you are using to take care of your family in the moment. And like you talk about, the money that's required after you move on from that position, whether that's retirement or a good severance package that allows you to make a healthy transition into the next season of ministry. And that's so often forgotten is this idea that yes, we're pastors and we're in it for God and Christ and the gospel and on, but at the end of the day, it is also our job and the way we make money, which, as I found in talking with people here at Mosaic and around the country as well, I think that plays into, like you said, talking about that succession plan. What am I going to do next? And will I be able to make this much money? And what does that mean? And the lack of planning. I think another thing, and I want to ask you this, I think a lot of people are in one way or another, there are many pastors who are in positions, as a pastor, but there's insecurity in that, or they find significance in their title, in their position. And I've seen that 32 years of ministry, a lot of people who are really insecure and or looking for significance in that. And I think, like you said, to get it in your belly early on, this isn't about you. The greatest thing that you can do is position your church for a life after you and work through some of the issues so somebody else doesn't have to. I think about Christ where he said, greater things you will do after I go, right?
That's
because
right.
He lays a foundation. And I've always had that attitude in ministry that success was working yourself out of a job and not trying to hold on and maintain it. So, I'm talking to you about this idea of a job and the attitudes that get pastors or keep pastors from having this conversation. I've thrown out insecurity. I've thrown out the fact that people see significance. You threw out the idea of money, lack of planning. Is all that a part of it? And there's some other things that keep that from being a conversation?
Yeah, I think another piece of the conversation, and two, and it has to go to identity. It is a job. But for the life of me, and maybe there's one and I can't find it, but I have looked high and low. I cannot find another career that is as all-consuming as being pastor of a local church. Mm. I mean, if you're a doctor, you do get to go home. If you're a lawyer, you do get to go home. If you're president of the United States, maybe okay for 4 years, but then you get to go home. You can take a day off. Pastors, you're not just doing work. You're doing work. You're doing friendship in your work. Your social network is in your work. Your spiritual pilgrimage is tied to your work. Mm. Your sense of worth is tied to your work. And, when all that goes away, if you don't have some place to pour your identity, man, you're lost as a goose. And 9 times out of 10, when the pastor that left kind of hangs around and micromanages, it's because they don't have any place to pour their identity.
Yeah.
It's not that they're mean or micromanaging or anything like that. They just don't have anything to go do. So I think, years ago, when I was a pastor in my 30s, I had the privilege of having John Maxwell really speak into my life at a personal level for quite a while. And I asked John, look, I'm at the church that I think I'll be at the rest of my career. I'm 31. What do I do? And he said, William, smart young men spend their early years creating options for their later years.
Mm.
And I thought, wow, okay, that's why you're John Maxwell and I'm not. And he said it like in that big voice too, that he's got. So
yeah.
So, whether that's financial or getting involved in some mission thing, some secondary cause that you can build out during the latter part of your ministry, so that when you retire, you're just going to the next thing. You're not getting put out to pasture. And I think equally important would be making sure that if you're a male pastor, that your wife has the same option, because the spouse of the outgoing pastor maybe even has a harder emotional adjustment than the pastor themselves. Mm-hmm. And so those things I think contribute to the conversation. I think, frankly, what's the old saying? Public speaking is the number one fear of people. It's a greater fear than death. And the old I think Seinfeld line was everybody would rather be the subject of the funeral than the speaker at the funeral, right? Yeah. So whatever God puts into a person to be able to do public speaking, and not just public, but stand up and say, hey, here's what God says for your life today. I mean, that's serious gifting, right?
Yeah.
So I think the shadow side of that gifting is the voice that whispers in the pastor's ear that says, you've got one more year. You can keep going. And we even named it, in the book, we named it Brett Favre syndrome. It's like, I can come back one more. I can do it. I got it, coach. And it's none of it's poorly intentioned. Nobody wakes up and says, I really want to be an ornery cuss and not be able to retire well. Nobody. But all these factors sort of play into what's been an epidemic. And hopefully the book will help detangle some of that and create room for a conversation that will lead to healthier transitions.
Yeah, that's great. Well, the book is called Next, Pastoral Succession That Works by William Vanderbloemen and Warren Bird. A great book for conversations that need to happen far sooner than they typically do in churches. William, one more question I want to ask you about. You mentioned earlier that pastors often don't leave themselves a space to go to. The idea of thinking about what's next or what have you. I know I've seen that before, where a guy goes from the number one position in the church to absolutely nothing. And have you guys in your research, did you find, I found even in churches where pastors stay, there's that old thing about a micromanager, right? So he's no longer the pastor, but he's going to tell everybody what to do. But in a healthy situation, a person like that could move to a different position in the organization or in some way, and not be that kind of ornery cuss, like you said, but be very supportive. I think that's a very healthy thing.
Yes.
And potentially it leaves yourself a position within the church to continue to ministry, maybe not in the driver's seat anymore, but if you have a healthy self-esteem, if you're secure in who you are, if you really have a vision for the future, I think that's a great way to go. I've thought about that for myself as well, maybe moving to the side, continuing to be an elder, or maybe even teaching, but not being involved in the day-to-day and encouraging someone else. Did you find any of that works for pastors?
Yeah.
They actually have to leave the church for it to be good.
Yeah, that is such a good question, Mark. And I'll bookend it by saying, don't use any cookie-cutter approach to succession. Every church is different. But many, many times we saw, and I will say that one of the few cardinal rules of succession is a good succession always rises and falls on the outgoing pastor. So it is that guy that's self-confident, has a good marriage, has made enough money, isn't worried that, if Saul is slain his thousands and David is tens of thousands, if that starts getting said, they're not going to get rattled. So it takes a rare individual. But I look at like Bethany World Prayer Center in Baton Rouge, Louisiana. People don't know that church as well as they should. It's birthed a ton of great churches. Church of the Highlands came out of there. New Life Church in Arkansas came out of there. So Pastor Stockstill starts the church. He passes it off to his son, Larry. Larry pastors it till he's about mid-50s. He passes it off to Jonathan. So Larry's in his mid-50s, and he's pretty much, kind of the godfather of that part of the town. What does he do? Well, Jonathan very wisely said, Dad, you love traveling, you love public speaking, you love planting churches. Would you be our missions pastor? And we're going to funnel all our mission money into your organization and let you just run with that. And he has, and it's been beautiful. Jonathan's got his dad around to ask his advice about things, but his dad's got more than enough to do, so he's not, kind of micromanaging the situation. So it can work. I think it takes a really secure outgoing pastor. Mm-hmm. I think it takes clearly defined, written down, signed contractual boundaries about who's going to do what. Mm-hmm. And I would focus those boundaries around the most emotional pieces of pastoring. Sounds silly, but all right, so you're going to stick around, that's fine. What are we going to do when your longtime friend's wife dies? Mm-hmm. Who's going to do the funeral? Let's figure that out on the front end, so we don't have to do that in the middle. Yeah. But if you can draw those boundaries real clearly and make sure that everybody's kind of well adjusted, then there's room for that to be a success. Yeah. Yeah,
that's great. Well, again, the book is called Next, Pastoral Succession That Works. William Vanderbloemen, Warren Bird, out this week on Baker Books. And William, it's been great to have you, a good friend. Appreciate your heart, your ministry, helping churches in this area and many others from your own experience in life. And you were mentioning the Brett Favre syndrome. I've often thought, and I have actually practiced this in my 32 years of ministry, but I always believe it's important to go out on top. And when you do go out on top, stay out on top, stay out. So otherwise, people can affirm you. In one of my ministries that I left at the absolute height of the quote unquote success of that ministry. And people were just like, what are you doing? You've got, this is great. Well, to me, that's the time you go out. You've laid a foundation, you've built it, it's strong, and you go out then. And then, for anybody who might be insecure or otherwise a little concerned about going out, man, then the rest of the time people just talk great about you.
That's right.
When you get past it, because you were a hero, you left a hero, and
that's so wise.
I think anybody who's battling going out should realize that that's what leaves a positive legacy. Unlike a Brett Favre or some of these other athletes that just don't know when to quit and they go back and you kind of their great success is marred because of those final memories, And
the truth is, Mark, there are exceptions to this, but more often than not, people will remember how you leave a lot longer than they'll remember all the things you did while you were there.
That's a great word. Well, great to have you again today.
Thanks,
William.
Mark.
Go get the book, everyone. Next, Pastoral Succession That Works with Baker. Good to have you, William, and God bless. Good luck with the book.
Thank you, Mark. Appreciate it so much.